All right, it's the B Block Podcast. Brandon Scott here, hosting with you. I appreciate you for joining me. Want to shout out Foolish Club Media for the partnership. And we're going to get into a few things on the podcast today. We got to react to the Rockets Warriors game 4. The Warriors are now up 3-1 against the Rockets. And we're going to talk quite a bit about what the Rockets got going on, both in this series and what their future looks like. I also want to take a moment to react to the Texans draft class. I actually feel really good about it, and I want to tell you why. But first, we got to get to the meat of the matter here, and it's the fact that the Rockets, unfortunately, have played right into the exact narratives that existed about them. Now, you guys will remember on the podcast, I was really high on the Rockets. I picked them to win this series in 7. I felt like the physical matchup was in favor of the Rockets, even if the experience was not in their favor. Even if you could say, and I would agree with this, that the Warriors clearly have the 2 best players in this series. I thought that the Rockets had the depth and the matchups to combat that and to even overcome it. And I was wrong. Now, a lot of this thought was predicated on the idea that the Rockets' young stars, because I did think that that's what this was going to be about, right? Like, I didn't feel like your best players on a given night could be the Fred VanVleets or Dylan Brooks or, anybody really other than the guys that were drafted to be in this position, the guys that they have, I think, built this team around or centered their future around. That's Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, and Amin Thompson. I think you needed the best versions of them in order for this series to be not only competitive, but obviously for them to have an opportunity to win it. And they failed that test. They have overall failed that test. I think with the exception of Alperen Sengun and this most recent game from Amin Thompson, and then the one game from Jalen Green, they have largely failed that test. Now, the big thing and the big focus, I feel like, is on Jalen Green, and in some ways it feels unfair because it's not just a Jalen Green problem with the Rockets. They got some other issues as well, but I think it all kind of comes back to that. Like, Fred VanVleet shooting as many shots as he did in game 1. The fact that Fred VanVleet was your best guard in game 4. Those are both issues that actually tie back to Jalen Green not exactly playing up to, I think, the level and the standard that you need from him. So he hasn't been good enough. And I think that the residual effect of what the Rockets are offensively without him playing up to his potential, that really rips the floor apart when you're talking about this team. Now you're asking more of Alperen Sengun. Now you're asking more of Fred VanVleet. Now you're asking more of Dylan Brooks. You saw Amin Thompson finally wake up a little bit offensively and really realize what his superpowers were. And that was getting downhill and forcing the issue and getting to the rim. And of course, in game 3, it seemed like part of the game plan was to bait him into taking mid-range shots that he quite frankly needed to knock down and failed to do so. So I thought that was, a failure on his part in that particular game. But again, this was a test that I think, my logic going in was, hey, there's all of this talk and narrative about the Rockets not having a closer, the Rockets not having a clear-cut superstar. And I understood where that was coming from because I think those things were largely true, but I thought it ignored the possibility that the guys who are clearly supposed to be the superstars could emerge and could arrive and had this moment right in front of them where they could introduce themselves to the larger basketball viewing public introduce themselves as stars. And that is what I was betting on. That is what I was expecting the Rockets to do. And they, again, have in large part not done that. You look at Jalen Green, and the one game that the Rockets have won was because he went off and was incredible and had 38 points. But that has shown to be the outlier. I said it on Sports Radio 610 earlier today that it's the one step forward, two step back sort of situation where he's got the 38 points in the one game that they win, but it's single digit scoring output in every game that they lost. And it's hard to look at that as a coincidence. And again, I mentioned this is not a pile on Jalen Green type of situation because it wasn't just him. It was also the entire team shooting poorly. 12 missed free throws in a game that you lose by 3 points, like on the road in the playoffs, like that is just an obvious missed opportunity. That is an overall team failure, not just one guy. But if you focus on this one guy and what his role is supposed to be, like what his part in all of it is supposed to be, you failed the test because everything is really predicated on Fred VanVleet not having to be your best perimeter scorer, Jalen Green meeting the moment and being right there with Alperen Sengun in terms of the focal point of the offense and in terms of reliability. And that's the big issue that we've got here. So you didn't have that. Like the Rockets do not appear, to me at least, to be a savvy enough team, either schematically or simply just in the way that they play. This is not an intellectually savvy enough team to compensate for their most talented perimeter player and scorer to be loose with the ball, to be unable to consistently create shots for himself and others. I think it's just a markedly less talented team when Jalen Green isn't right, and especially against a team like the Warriors, and especially in a playoff setting. And that's what happened here. And that is why ultimately they failed this test. Now, the series is not over as we're recording this, right? They're down 3-1. They're going back home. The last time they were at home, they won and Jalen Green played well. You could very much see and imagine that happening again, where maybe he's on this particular night. They go up there or come down here, I should say, and win game 5 and go back to Golden State with a chance to tie up the series. But I think now you have enough of a sample size to feel like what they need to work is more unreliable than it is reliable. Now, I will say that the Alperen Sengun Draymond Green matchup has been like pretty good. Like it's one of those where it's a tip the cap to both of them, because look, you look back on this game, and I thought Shingun made the most out of the non-Draymond minutes when he's out of the game because he's got 5 fouls and a technical and a flagrant and all of that. And so I feel like you've got to give Draymond credit for the defense that he's played on Shingun, and he clearly affects Shingun in a way that clearly nobody else on that team is. And of course, Draymond is one of the better defenders in the league, one of the better defensive players of all time. We get that, but I also have to give credit to Alperen Sengun for holding his own for the most part in that matchup. Right, like I think it clearly affects him. And of course, Alperen Sengun is not a perfect player by any stretch, but I feel like he has proven that he is up for the moment, can be a playoff performer. You even look at that last shot, and I'm like, man, it seems like he rushed that shot. Like he was there for the moment, but Draymond physical with him and made him maybe pick up his dribble and not necessarily trust his footwork or his game in that moment and kind of rush the shot. I'm not sure if he would agree with that, but that's the way that it looked. But overall, I feel like I feel like if you do again, not a perfect player, but proved that he's a playoff performer, Alperen Şengün, 31 points, if I'm not mistaken, in this game. You think about this split screen of Jalen Green not really being able to fully figure out the Warriors versus the battles that Şengün has had against Draymond Green, one of the all-time great defenders, one-on-one. And one is not like the other. Like one has, I think, for the most part, again, met the matchup, and the other just, quite frankly, is not. Like I look through, you just look through the games here with Green, and again the single digit output. But and let me pull this back up because I had it a moment ago. But it's really like it's not even just the single digit part. I think that's, I mean, that's the part that stands out the most. But if you go beyond that, like it's the shooting. He's made, so outside of the 30-point game, okay, and you guys can look this up for yourselves, of course. But this is this is worth looking at to me. He is 10 for 34. He's 10 for 34 out in the three losses that the Rockets have in this series. Green is 10 for 34, which by my calculation is less than 30, is just under 30%, like 29% or something like that, right? If I'm doing that math, I could be doing that math wrong. I think I'm doing it correctly. It's 10 over 34. It's 29%. That's what he is. 3 for 15 in game 1, 4 for 11 in game 3, and 3 for 8 last night, or Monday night, in Monday night's game. 10 for 34. All right. 2 for 14 from 3. 1 for 5 over the last 2 games, in each of the last 2 games from 3. And then 0 for 4 in game 1. So 2 for 14 from 3. How about this one? And this is one I miss doing the H-Town Hoops podcast with Adam Spillane, and I hate that podcast was forced to end. But this is something that he and I talked about quite a bit on the on the now defunct H-Town Hoops podcast, was how critical it is for Jalen Green on nights when his shot is not falling. Okay, on nights when defenses are keyed in on him and they're packing the paint and they're being physical with him, how important it is for Jalen Green to get to the free throw line. We talked about that for quite a bit throughout this season. I want to say even last season, basically since Udoka has been there, how important it is for Jalen Green to get to the free throw line. And how about the fact that he has not done that? Like that is a part of the struggles that stand out just as much as anything. Just as much as him not being out there on the floor in critical moments, just as much as him being lost, just as much as him being loose with the ball early in the game. It's the it's the 5 free throws in 3 games. The five attempted free throws in the 3 losses. Okay? You want to know how many of them he's made of those 5 attempted free throws? 2. So we're not scoring, we're not knocking down shots, we're not getting to the line. We're making spotty decisions, we're turning the ball over. It's just it's just rough, man. It's rough. It is a failure of the test. I did think it was interesting. One of the things, like, from just kind of taking all of this in, going down, watching them go down 3-1, I thought it was interesting to look at this Rockets team in a lot of ways as being the opposite of the previous era of Rockets teams that battled the Warriors, like them kind of being the inverse. If you think about it, like back then, the Rockets had 2 elite ISO players from the perimeter for the most part, right? Like 2 elite ISO players, and Chris Paul and James Harden, And these are guys who could score and distribute pretty much as well as anyone, and Chris Paul and James Harden. Everyone on the court with them had to either be a threat from three or they had to be a lob threat. In the case of, say, a Clint Capella, for example. Now you have an offense that is centered around really one good ISO player, but it's an ISO post player who is unfortunately surrounded by inconsistent shooters and ball handlers and decision makers. Like Fred VanVleet is what they have called and what is clearly the brains of the operation, but is an inconsistent shooter. And shout out to him for his performance. I thought like Fred VanVleet in game 4 gave him a chance to win. I wasn't even mad at the final shot that fell short. He was the one, unfortunately, again, he was the one that I felt the most comfortable taking it based off of how that game played out. And less so about him because he hadn't played well up into that game, but also based on how the rest of the series had played out up until that point. That up until that point, you didn't have anybody else that I thought had a better case to take the shot, and I wish that you did. But now again, you've got an offense centered around one good ISO post player who does not have consistent shooters and playmakers and decision makers around him. And so that doesn't work. It obviously is a major problem, a major issue for the Rockets, and a big reason why up until this point they have failed the test against the Warriors. Again, I think the door is open for them winning another game in this series, winning the next game in this series. It's their only chance at it, right? Do or die. I could see it. But the 3 games that the Warriors have won seem to be not just because you have 3 of them, but they just seem to be more indicative of what this matchup is, as opposed to how I projected it. Now, I think Amin Thompson's defense was also a big part of the analysis going into this series because of what he had done with Steph Curry at the end of the season, essentially shutting them down and forcing him to have one of the worst, if not the worst game of his entire career. And that just happened recently. Now, that it has not necessarily been like that. Not even necessarily. It has not at all been like that in this series. But in game 4, I thought the defense looked a lot better. And I would even say, like in the second half, I came away from the game a lot more encouraged about Amin Thompson and by Amin Thompson and his, some struggles that he had before in the series, kind of attributing those to it just being his first time and him being a young player. A benefit of the doubt that unfortunately Jalen Green does not get because he has been in the league a couple of years longer, and he is just flat out more relied upon offensively than Thompson is. But clearly, like you look back at game 3, and part of the game plan was to bait him into taking shots, and they were able to thought that they could live with him shooting the ball. And it was like, on him to make them pay for that, right? The way Draymond Green makes teams pay, like you look back at this game and he hits his first couple of threes in game 4, but throughout their history, Draymond Green, the Warriors' history, that is, Draymond Green has been the defensive guy who opposing teams have tried to bait into shooting the ball. The defensive guy who opposing teams have decided they'll live with this guy shooting the ball because they don't really respect his offensive game. And to Draymond Green's credit, he's done a really good job of making teams pay over the years for doing that, for playing it that way. This game was similar in that way. Amin Thompson didn't necessarily do that in game 3, but in game 4, I thought as the game went on, he found his rhythm, and somewhere it clicked in him that him downhill is a problem for anybody. And rather than just taking those open mid-range shots that they were giving him, it was important for him to sort of force the issue, get the ball in transition if he could, and even just take his man off the dribble and see what he could get at the basket. And I thought he gave you some, show some heart there toward the end of the game. Overall, I wouldn't say it's been a great series for him either. But after game 4, I was able to kind of say, yeah, this is still that incredible talent that I have been talking about throughout the year. And honestly, through the first 3 games, it was rough. The men had been a rough watch the first 3 games, at least for me, you know. So he is an incredible talent that I think we've only really scratched the surface with how good he actually can be. I mean, that'll be interesting. More on him in just a second. I do want to acknowledge again the great game that Fred VanVleet had here. I don't I don't want him doing what he did in game 1 where he's taking 19 shots. And I obviously didn't love the results that you'd gotten from Fred VanVleet leading up to this game prior to game 4. But he's absolutely somebody that I'm okay with having on my team for I feel like the level headedness that you get, and maybe this is because you don't necessarily get that from the entire team, and so I'm appreciative for what you're getting out of like leader Fred VanVleet. But man, he just can't be your best guard, and you're talking about beating the Warriors. Like he can be Fred VanVleet. Again, I think you want a guy like that on your team, but you want him on your team in a role in a capacity that is supplementary. And when you're not getting the guard play that you're supposed to get, and you're having to rely on him to play an outsized role, I think it looks like it looked last night, where he's giving you an incredible night, and you're just you're just not quite good enough. Now, you could easily say, hey, yeah, no, it is good enough if you make, instead of missing 12 free throws, maybe you miss 4, right? You lost by 3. Maybe you miss 4 free throws. Maybe you miss 5 free throws. They missed 12. So, yeah, man. I should acknowledge Steven Adams in this game. Turned out, Steven Adams, I was thinking about this watching the game. Steven Adams has turned out to be the best non-Harden trade that Rafael Stone has made so far. And keep an eye on that, right? Put a pin in that on Rafael Stone trades and what the future looks like for this team, right? But so far, Steven Adams is the best, and you could say, I would say the best trade acquisition, depending on how much do you value. You put a much greater value on the draft picks that they've accumulated, especially if it ends up netting them a superstar in the long run. But for right now, Steven Adams has turned out to be the best and even the picks, right? They all stem from a Harden trade. I would say the best acquisition from Rafael Stone so far in a trade, Steven Adams, man, yet another tangible and impactful move from the GM, who I would say I admittedly did not give enough respect in the beginning of all of this. But that does bring me to the larger point, okay? And I mentioned that the Rockets failed the test. The larger point here with the Rockets, at least from where I sit, is what their future looks like. Because the test wasn't just about the short term and whether they could get past the Warriors in this series and all of that. Like that was part of it. But the other part of it is, and this has been talked about quite a bit going into it, and a big part of the Rockets' overall narrative is how much of this core they committed to going forward. And Who are they parting ways with to up the ante, to level up, to raise both the floor and the ceiling? How are they going to do that? Because look, they absolutely need to get better in terms of perimeter scoring and playmaking. They need better players. Okay, like that's just the reality of it. And I feel like I've done enough Jalen Green critique already, without it feeling like, I'm piling on. Cause I feel like if you have been as big of Jalen Green fans and advocates throughout these last couple of years as we've seen him develop and grow as a player, not just because of Ime Udoka, but because of the veterans that I feel like that they brought around. And I feel like I've seen a real maturity out of him over the last couple of years. So not just to pile on or disrespect, but I think that what you have learned here is that you need, especially if Alperen Şengün, here's what I'd say. I think Alperen Şengün and Amin Thompson are the two clear cornerstones and foundations in terms of young players that they have on this team. If, in fact, you believe in building around any of the young players on this team, right? Like I think Jalen Green is obviously their most talented perimeter player and scorer, but is inconsistent, right? And stardom, something that we've been talking about really since this series started, how stardom requires, especially superstardom, but stardom just even in general, requires a level of consistency and reliability that he has not yet shown. He's shown ability, but not reliability, not consistency. And that's what you got to have to be a star. Amin Thompson, honestly, based off of this series, I think you could say something similar, but has only played 2 seasons, has only gotten better in those 2 seasons, and has like clear ability and intangibles and room to grow where you're willing to stay invested, where at least I speak for myself, I'm willing to stay invested in that as a centerpiece of the team. Alperen Şengün, another obvious one to me based off of how he's played. Now, do I want him to be the best player on the team? That's the conversation that I feel like you got to have about the future of this team. I feel like that is, you can have him be a big part of the offense or a centerpiece of the offense or run your offense through him. But if you're gonna have Şengün, to me, if you're gonna have Şengün and Amin Thompson as centerpieces of your team, and if you're gonna run your offense through Alperen Şengün and have Amin Thompson on the floor, the other three guys on the floor got to be reliable shooters and or playmakers. Got to be knockdown shooters, reliable decision makers, and playmakers. Guys who can either knock down, who can actually either or both knock down shots and swing the ball. Either move without the ball or actually move the basketball. They don't have enough guys that do that right now. And that's why their offense looks so primitive. Right? Like you watch the Warriors out there, and of course I know they got Steph Curry and that they're, maybe a bad comparison because of how historically great that they've been, but like over the years. But even like with this outfit that I've been saying is less talented, to me is a less talented group than the Rockets. Man, they're out there running around and cutting and setting screens. I know they get, criticized for their illegal screens, but they're out there moving without the basketball, moving the basketball, making the right pass. It's just night and day. Feels like night and day. And if you're gonna have an kind of old school centered offense, it does have to mix the new school of shooters around it. right? Like you think about Dwight Howard being the best player on those Magic teams from 15 years ago or so. Like they had Dwight Howard, and who was a force inside, but everybody around him could shoot. Everybody on the floor needs to be able to shoot, whether that's Jalen Green, Fred Van Vliet. Like those guys need to be reliable shooters. Where do you get those? So I ain't gonna hold you, as they say, but here's where I'm at. All right. I want y'all to feel me here. On the big questions about the Rockets' future, here's where I'm at. I want to trade for Kevin Durant, and I want to explore putting the keys in Reed Shepard's hands. Like a scenario where instead of Fred Van Vliet, and again, shout out to Fred Van Vliet for the game that he had in game 4 and for what he has overall brought to this franchise. I think he's brought a level of, like, he's been an adult in the room, a calming force. Like, I don't think that's just a bunch of smoke that we hear about the way that they look at and view Fred Van Vliet and the overall impact that he's had on this team. But when you get down to it, I think the Reed Shepard thing has a lot. There's a lot there and a lot higher ceiling to what that could actually be. I think Kevin Durant as an upgraded shooting guard or as your primary perimeter scorer over, say, Jalen Green is an obvious one. And I want to flip the backcourt. I want to flip the backcourt a little bit. I think a trade with Fred Van Vliet to the Phoenix Suns, along with, say, Cam Whitmore and some collection of the Suns picks. I'm not sure if that's 2 picks, 3 picks, but they got enough of the Suns picks to make this happen. I'd like to see, and I don't know. Let me preface all of this by saying I don't know how realistic of a vision this actually is. This is something that I envision, something that I more so am intrigued by. Reed Shepard, Kevin Durant, Amin Thompson, Dylan Brooks, and Alperen Sengun as my starting 5 next year, with the possibility of a Jabari Smith Jr. maybe being back in that starting lineup if we want to make it bigger, right? And you figure that out if Amin is somebody that's coming off the bench, or if Reed is actually the guy coming off the bench, and Amin and Kevin Durant and Dylan Brooks are your guards and wings, right? And Jabari and Shingun are your 4 and 5. Like, you can sell me on either one of those combinations. But the point here is Kevin Durant as solving your solution for the reliable perimeter scorer. And honestly, for me, investing in Reed Shepard the way that you invested in Jalen Green. Now, I understand that the circumstances are different. The situation is a lot different now for Reed Shepard and where the Rockets are in as Reed Shepard develops, as opposed to where they were when they drafted Jalen Green. But I do believe that if you were to take Reed Shepard and put him on those early Rockets teams that Jalen Green was a part of, that he could have played just as much and just as many minutes as Jalen did. So what I'm curious of is where he's at now in the development. Like, seriously, where is Reed Shepard now in the development, and what is it going to take to get him to a point or to a space where he is trustworthy enough for them to play significant minutes, whether it's in the starting lineup or coming off the bench? But I would like to see the Rockets. now that they've been this, like they've gone from this cute story now to where like they really need to find solutions, and maybe like looking at Reed Shepard as an answer is a little too ambitious because of how unproven he is. But I go back to the point of needing shooting and playmaking. And Reed has shown, I think, an exceptional ability at both, understanding the game on top of being a knockdown shooter. I would I would be intrigued by like just understanding a little bit better of how much he's learned and how much he's grown as a rookie to think about like what could he contribute to them in year two. Could you look at it and have Reed Shepard play? Well, I'm not saying that he needs to play in this series or that I thought he needed to play in this series. I would have liked to have seen him in those moments when they couldn't shoot the ball worth a damn, which has been a good portion of this series. I would have been intrigued by him, but I understand him having not played as much, not being trustworthy. But do you spend some of your regular season giving him the keys a little bit, like just giving them the key and letting them take it out for a spin a little bit, experimenting more, and less of an experiment, but more so like just straight up developing it and just sort of getting some callus on his hands, some experience to where you do get to the end of the season if you're fortunate enough to be in the playoffs again, where you're confident enough that he's ready to play. I think his shooting and creation plays a lot better and to me is worth exploring. So that's where I'm at. I want some combination of Reed Shepard, Kevin Durant, Amin Thompson, Dylan Brooks, and Alperen Sengun, and possibly Jabari Smith in instead of Reed Shepard. I just, at that point, I worry about your like is a min. I don't feel like a min is ready to be your primary ball handler. So at that point, you're asking a lot of Kevin Durant and Dylan Brooks. That's why I'm banking on the Reed Shepard thing. Like, can he be that weird turnaround there to go from Rockets in 7 to is Reed Shepard the future? And how do we go get Kevin Durant? Weird turnaround there. But that is what I've learned or what I've taken from the information that I've been given. So that's where I'm at with the Rockets. Okay, so let's hit this Texans draft real quick. I feel like the Texans got better. I'll tell you why I believe the Texans got better with the 9 players that they picked in this draft. To me, when I look at it and I start with the second round pick with Jaden Higgins, well, first of all, let's just say there was a lot of angst when Nick Caserio traded out of the first round, a lot of disappointment, a lot of a lot of letdown, I would say, just based off of the feeling that he might trade up. And at the very least, he'd be comfortable with just picking at 25 if it came down to it. I don't think a lot, and there were some because I saw this. I know Texans Cap was one of the ones that was, at least out of the folks that I follow, was one of the first to sort of project in like in the moment that hey, it's starting to become prime trade back territory and positioning for the Texans in this thing. But there was a lot of I feel like angst about that. I was more so just disappointed about how much anticipation went into the night and how much excitement went into the night, only to find out that we didn't have no pick to discuss. There was no going to be no pick today. I wasn't really upset from an actual team building standpoint, like, hey, the sky is falling and they're not going to be able to get a good enough player with the second pick in the second round. So I wasn't tripping on that part. I was more so tripping on the whole spectacle thing, right? Or lack thereof for the first round, which for what I do for my job matters. Sorry if you're just straight football, meathead and all you care about is the X's and O's. But I'm here for the vibes and for the moment and for the discussion and for the clicks and for really everything that comes with it, right? And so that's why I was mad. But I ain't feel like, hey, they're gonna get to the second round and they're not gonna have no players that are any good that they can pick. And so they get Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver out of Iowa State, with the second pick in the second round, the 34th overall pick. And I'm like, yo, you got a 6'4", 4'4" guy. And when you go watch him play, and if you remember him playing at Iowa State, you can remember him being a guy who ran pretty good routes and moved really well. Like the thing that I like most about Jaden Higgins is how well he moves for his size. And I think he is going to be a more traditional X type of receiver, but I think he's got a little bit of the Nico Collins in him, whereas I feel like we do a bad job of typecasting the receiver based off of what size he is. So if he's big as hell, like Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins are, then that's an X receiver. That's an outside guy, and you need somebody. You need a more, you need a more of a speed guy, or you need something to offset that. How do they fit together? Or if it's a smaller guy, you just kind of, without even watching the tape or without any like real prior knowledge to what his game is, oh, this small guy must be a slot guy or a gadget guy, or surely he's not one of your outside receivers because he's not 6'3" or taller. And that's just not, as the game evolves and develops, you start to see, and I feel like it's really been this way in the past, but even more so now, where you see guys of different sizes that can just do a bunch of different things, right? And different offenses and how they actually even use the slot position. Sometimes your slot receiver actually turns out to be your tight end. And so like I'm saying all of this to say that Jaden Higgins feels like a fine compliment to Nico Collins and somebody who addresses a major need that the Texans had going into this offseason and certainly going into this draft. And I feel like, so the big reason why I feel good, and I hate that I still got the Rockets. For those watching on YouTube, my bad for still having the Rockets. That's an error in production on my part. But the reason why I feel like you should feel good about the draft picks is because you have between Jaden Higgins and then his teammate in Jalen Noel, who they drafted in the third round. I think you've got two guys that are going to immediately contribute to your offense in some way, some form or fashion. Higgins has a good chance to be that guy opposite of Nico Collins. But even if he's not, like, even if that guy turns out to be Justin Watson, or, like if or if Xavier Hutchinson or John Mechie survive camp, like, even so, Jaden Higgins is on the team, and I'm pretty sure the third round pick, Jalen Knowles, on the team. Both of these Iowa State guys are going to be on the team, and I think having them, obviously if healthy, having them in the tool bag is going to be a plus for CJ Stroud one way or another. How big of a role they play, we'll obviously see, but I would be shocked if these guys are not chain movers and scorers for the Texans offense in 2025. I think you got two guys that can contribute in that way. And then when we talk about the picking between those, the second round pick that they got, Ariante Ursary, the left tackle out of Minnesota, and who my analysis on him initially was, this is a big motherfucker. And I think that is just fair to say. He's 6'6", 330 plus. And this is a mountain of a dude. I don't know what they're gonna do with his big ass in his rookie year, but they're gonna have to figure out something. If he is not immediately a tackle, which I could see that not being the case, considering what they've invested in Cam Robinson, right? I think what they've invested already in free agency between Cam Robinson and the fact that Blake Fisher's on the team, who has a lot of promise, I think at least. Or look, I wasn't as impressed with him in real time, but as I've watched going back, done a little bit of homework on Blake Fisher, I think there's a lot there. He just kind of has to. He's still kind of a baby. Forget exactly how old he is, but not. But very, very, very young, and just has to. His body has to come into his own. But I think there's a lot of promise there. So you brought in Cam Robinson. You already have Blake Fisher. I feel like those guys are probably your tackles. Oh, by the way, Titus Howard still exists, but to me, they've shown this is a clear sign that Titus Howard is either one or both. His tackle first of all, his tackle days are over. I feel like with the Texans, and I'm not so sure how long he's here for the ride. Like we might be looking at his last season with the team. And so what I'm looking at here between Ursery and Blake Fisher, their second round pick from a year before, is the projected tackles of the future if things work out the way that they hope they do. Seems like this is your left tackle of the future. But as I mentioned, his big ass is 6'6", 330 plus. He ain't played no guard. All he's been, Nick Caserio talked about this after the draft or after they drafted him. All he's been is a tackle. I don't think they know right now what else he can do or if he's up for bumping inside. It ain't for everybody. But his big ass is 6'6", 330 plus. For whatever reason, that intrigues me more, at least this season, since tackle is, for the most part, I feel like figured out. I don't know how good it's going to be, but they got the guys. They got guys. That's another thing. Just as a side note, I said, and Ursery is going to factor into whether I'm ultimately correct or not, because that's the offensive lineman that they drafted. But I said ahead of this draft that I thought, and I didn't like this thought, but I did believe that the Texans were going to come away from this draft by the end of this draft, or put it this way. I said that the starting offensive line for the Texans was already on the roster. That the Texans starting 5 offensive linemen going into 2025 would not include somebody that they drafted. It would include only the guys that were already on the team up until that point, whenever I said it. This is after, of course, they've traded for Ed Ingram and they brought in Laken Tomlinson and they've signed Cam Robinson, like the offensive line that we know, save for now Ursery. And he is now the wild card. Okay. I don't think he's going to play his natural position for the Texans. I don't think he's going to be their left tackle. I think that's going to be Cam Robinson. I don't think he's going to be their right tackle because that doesn't make any damn sense. They got 2 guys that just have way more experience at right. 3 guys that have way more experience and are right tackles, between Blake Fisher, who's probably going to be that, and of course there's Titus Howard and Trent Brown. They also brought in, who could be their right tackle. Which I don't think I don't even know if he's healthy enough to be in that conversation. But anyway, the point is, in this season, is his big ass big enough and bold enough, and are they big enough and bold enough to just bump him inside and say, hey, we like this option at guard better than one of these guys who's underperformed in recent years between Ingram and Laken Tomlinson? Because if I had to guess right now, I'm going Cam Robinson, Laken Tomlinson, Juice Scruggs and Jared Patterson, I guess, are battling for center in training camp. And then Ed Ingram and Blake Fisher on the other side. And maybe Titus is a better guard than Laken Tomlinson at this point in his career. I don't know. So maybe he's your guard. He makes a lot of money. If he's going to still be there, I figure they want to find a way to get him on the field. But I feel good about it because you've got 2 weapons, potentially your left tackle of the future, and potentially somebody who could play for you inside this year. And then perhaps my favorite pick is in the 4th round, running back out of USC, but really of Mississippi State fame, and that's Woody Marks. And Woody Marks, I remember at Mississippi State, I lost him. I lost track. I'm just being honest with you here. I lost track of him at USC. Didn't realize he was at USC. Did not follow him at USC. But I do remember him being a beast at Mississippi State. I do remember that, and I know that a couple of football guys that I trust, and John Harris and Clint Sterner, who really have watched him closely, particularly when he was at Mississippi State. And I think John probably has watched every snap because he's like that. This is a good solution, I feel like, or this is a potential solution, and I think could be a really good solution to their backup running back issues that they've had now for some time. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask Nick Caserio leading up to the draft, and we just did not get around to this question, but somebody did. I think I laid off of it because Aaron Wilson did ask him some roundabout question about running back, not specifically the way that I was wanting to ask it, but my thing was how important or how much of a, this is what I would have asked Nick Caserio. How much of a conversation piece has it been among the front office and coaching staff trying to address Joe Mixon's workload, given how much football that he's played and given how important he obviously is to your run game? Like, of course, you'd love to have a committee of running backs, but you've got a singular guy who is different, who's special. Joe Mixon is special. How do you find a way to preserve that special for as long and as much as possible? And this is not necessarily a knock on DP, on Damian Pierce or Daria Gumbawale per se, but like it seemed like they trusted, and like the strategy was to just lean on Joe Mixon, really lean on Joe Mixon. How much of a conversation piece is it to get a dude in there who can take some of the workload, more of the workload off of Joe Mixon? And I think Woody Marks has potential to be that guy. I think that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that Damian Pierce, in what I believe is the final year of his contract, doesn't still have a role on the team. Daria Gumbawale is very special team specific. Maybe Damian Pierce is in some ways as well in the kicking game, and just your third or part of your committee of guys that come in there and spell Joe Mixon. But Woody Marks, as like I think, you know, touted for as a third down back, a good pass catching option, an option out of the backfield that can help you in your passing game and really help supplement your run game. Like, I am intrigued by how they're going to use, and this is a new offense, so I don't even know necessarily or exactly what the offense is going to even look like. But I would guess that Woody Marks is going to be a name that we hear a lot in 2025. It could be a committee of contribution in the wide receiver room outside of Nico Collins, between the Jaden and Jalen combination. And of course, they've already, they got Christian Kirk and they got Watson, and they got they got some veterans on the team that could make some noise too. And we'll see what the competition looks like, who actually survives camp. But to me, Woody Marks, out of everybody, is going to be kind of how, like, the team is in a different position now, and they're not terrible. Damian Pierce was like the only good offensive player that they had his rookie year. It's not going to be that, but the way the late round running back ended up making the most noise in that rookie class, I feel like this could be that with Woody Marks. So I think you should like it. Now, they got a lot of Jalen's. That's going to get confusing, but I think it's going to be one of those things where we just start calling these dudes by their last name: Knowles, Smith, Reed. Like just forget their first names for a little bit. But I know a lot of people are excited about what some of these guys between Jalen Reed, the safety out of Penn State, and Jalen Smith, the cornerback out of USC, like what these guys could give you in terms of special teams and depth, maybe answer some issues, particularly with Smith, answering some issues that you might have had at depth and cornerback. We'll see if that's because, I mean, we're talking about a third round pick at corner. I don't feel like that's nothing to sneeze at, right? So like maybe this could be somebody that provides some like beyond just special teams, somebody that actually plays for you on defense. The Graham Mertz pick, I feel like is a flyer on a potential future backup. And Keontae Hamilton and Luke Lachey, the tight end out of Iowa. Look, you can sell me on a tight end out of Iowa. Like, and maybe he's the new Tegan Cotoriano who stays healthy or something like that. I am good with whatever you get from the dudes after the first 4 picks, and really I'm looking at the first 5 because of Woody Marks, and I got I'm a little bit higher on him than I probably am Smith, the cornerback, just because I feel a lot more comfortable about where they are at that position at cornerback. But I'm with it. I think that the Texans got better. I think they got contributors, guys that can come in and contribute right away. The issue, I think, for most people is the offensive line and the hope that they would come away from the draft with a better, stronger offensive line than they did when they started this offseason. And I think the disappointment for a lot of people, and I understand this, I would even subscribe to this, is that between free agency, the trade market, and the draft, it doesn't feel like you did enough along the offensive line to really feel great about the group that's going to be protecting CJ Stroud and to be responsible for CJ Stroud's protection and staying upright in year 3 in a new offense. But like to me, I do feel like they've added enough guys who have played enough football to where if you do coach it right and you do scheme it right, maybe you don't have a star offensive lineman among the group, but you do have potentially a good enough group of offensive linemen. I've been saying it forever. You don't need all pro offensive linemen. Now they can't suck. You can't be bad. But if they have the requisite physical ability and mentality and mindset and play on a string the way that an offensive line is supposed to, and just like, to me, it's more of a mentality and attitude and technique and how you're coached, right? As opposed to just the outright talent of the offensive line. So no, I'm not impressed by the talent that they've accumulated on the offensive line per se. I am willing to entertain that the collection, the group, can be good enough to get the job done. And when it comes to this draft and picking up Ariante Ursary, I feel like they might have gotten their left tackle of the future. A lot of people are high enough on Ursary to feel like he could be that guy. And again, Sun Gun big enough where I don't know why he couldn't play guard. He is huge. So, like, he hasn't played it, but we'll see. We'll see. But I think they did good. I think they did good in this draft. Now, I still don't necessarily love, again, the overall, like, the ceiling, what it feels like of this offensive line. But I am hoping that we can just bet on the floor, and that the floor is not it's not hell. It's not the bottom. All right, so that's it for this episode of the B Block Podcast. Again, make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure you rate, review, follow the B Block Podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. Also, check out Foolish Club Media, where you can also find the B Block Podcast and me hanging out with some of the fellas over there talking all kinds of stuff, not just Houston sports, but covering the sports landscape and pop culture world at large. Pretty fun time. So make sure you check us out there. Next episode, I'm hoping to do a bonus. You know, we do this on Tuesdays and Thursdays, publish on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'm hoping to do a bonus and look at some of the things that we were just talking about earlier with the Rockets and drop this thing on Wednesday with Lashard Binkley. Um, you know, we haven't I gotta double back and see if Lashard still has the time to chop it up and do some Rockets talk. But that is something that I do want to at least plug and put out there, because if it doesn't drop on Wednesday, that is something that Lashard and I are gonna do. Lashard Binkley of the Rockets Fuel podcast, and he's written over the years now for both SB Nation and I want to say Sports Illustrated, if I'm not mistaken. So he's been covering the Rockets for a few years and is a lifelong follower and observer of the Rockets. I did the Rockets Fuel podcast with him a couple of weeks ago, or leading into this series. So he's going to return the favor and come back on here. I really encourage y'all to look out for that episode, because it's something that I think it's a really good, when you get he and I together, you get a really good Rockets conversation. So keep an eye out for that. And for now, that is this edition of the Rock Podcast. Until next time.